All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the actual engine room of international environmental diplomacy. We're doing a deep dive into the strategic toolkit for the UNEP Nairobi Convention P5 Coordinator. If you've ever found yourself wondering how these massive, multinational environmental agreements are actually managed day in and day out, well, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to take the highly complex, often quite dense bureaucratic machinery of a top-tier United Nations leadership role and break it down into a clear, actionable blueprint.
Think about this for a second. How do you actually get sovereign nations to put aside their differences and protect a shared ocean? We aren't just talking about cleaning up a local park here. We are talking about the entire Western Indian Ocean. It's a massive diplomatic and environmental puzzle. You've got different countries with incredibly diverse national priorities, totally different economic capacities, distinct legal frameworks, and intense development pressures. The P5 coordinator has to somehow align all of those moving parts to create one unified front for marine protection. Honestly, it's a total masterclass in strategic leadership.
So, to make sense of the whole shebang, we'll be looking at 5 core areas: the coordinator's mandate, intergovernmental governance, programs and resource mobilization, data and inclusion, and finally, measuring institutional resilience.
Okay, just to set the stage real quick so we're all on the same page. The Nairobi Convention is essentially the intergovernmental platform for the Western Indian Ocean, and the United Nations Environment Program, or UNEP, was designated by the contracting parties, which just means the member countries, to act as the secretariat. The P5 coordinator is the person steering that ship. It's a role with some serious institutional weight, and it demands politically sensitive maneuvering at literally every turn.
Starting us off, Pillar 1, the coordinator's mandate, building a strategic system.
The big takeaway here? This role is definitely not about checking off isolated tasks. The source material draws a really sharp line between the old way of doing things, what it calls measuring activity volume, and the mature executive way, which is the strategic systems approach. See, if you're just tracking activity volume, you're just looking at fragmented tasks. You're busy just doing stuff. But a P5 coordinator has to drive real, measurable regional outcomes. You don't judge success by how many meetings were held. You judge it by actual environmental cooperation, on-the-ground progress, and, crucially, how much confidence the member countries actually have in the Secretariat.
You know how easy it is for a massive organization to just veer completely off course, right? Well, establishing a predictable management rhythm is how you prevent that. It's all about discipline. The coordinator runs weekly operational reviews, then zooms out for monthly program and finance checks, steps back even further for quarterly strategic performance reviews, and then, periodically, handles the heavy lifting of preparing for those big intergovernmental meetings. This rhythm is the heartbeat that keeps the strategic system healthy and catches risks before they blow up.
Moving right along to Pillar 2, intergovernmental governance, uniting nations.
This right here is where the rubber meets the road. A coordinator has to facilitate some highly sensitive regional cooperation, all while ruthlessly preserving the Secretariat's absolute neutrality. It's perfectly summed up by this quote: "Regional cooperation is strongest when it produces value at both regional and national levels." You can't just stand up there and preach about the good of the region. You have to actively demonstrate how working together lets these countries solve problems that would be way too expensive or just take way too long if they tried to go it alone. You have to prove why unity is actually valuable.
To juggle all of this without losing their minds, the coordinator relies on what's essentially an executive dashboard. We've synthesized the toolkit down to its core. You've got the strategy map, which visualizes the regional goals. Then there's the decision log, which makes sure that when countries make a commitment, it's actually tracked and actioned, not just buried in some meeting transcript. And the risk register? That's your early warning system for any roadblocks. The magic here is that these aren't just disconnected, boring reports. They function together as one unified system for oversight.
So, on a day-to-day basis, this turns into a rapid-fire checklist. Before any new project launches, a coordinator literally has to ask, what specific convention decision does this serve? How are we paying for it? Which countries have to agree? What could stop us in our tracks? And how will we prove the regional benefits? By making these questions a habit, the coordinator ensures that absolutely no effort is wasted on fragmented, off-mission projects.
Next up is Pillar 3, programs and resource mobilization, delivering results.
Look, it's one thing to agree on a policy in a fancy meeting room. It is a whole different ballgame to actually fund it and get it done on the ground. At this executive level, a robust program design requires some serious rigor. To make a project credible enough for partners to actually invest in it, you need a crystal clear problem statement and a rock-solid theory of change.
You have to spell out exactly who is responsible for implementing it and lay all your financing assumptions and risks out on the table. Without that discipline, the project is pretty much doomed from the start.
And speaking of paying for things, resource mobilization is obviously a massive part of the job. But, and this is super important, they don't treat fundraising like a series of isolated, desperate grant proposals. No way. They manage it as a strategic portfolio of diverse funding streams. This means balancing major global environment facility projects, the dedicated East African Trust Fund, and direct contributions from donors.
You really have to treat that funding as the bridge between what the member countries decided they want and the investable programs our partners can actually deliver. Managing finances at this level is all about predictability, total transparency, and stewardship. If you mess up the money or lose track of trust fund balances, you instantly lose the trust of the sovereign nations you're working so hard to unite.
All right, Pillar 4, data, knowledge, and inclusion, informed decisions.
Now, handling data and ensuring inclusion aren't just bureaucratic boxes you tick off at the end of the day. They are core operational capabilities. Take the workflow for data governance. The source text explicitly warns against just hoarding information. A massive data dump is completely useless to decision makers. Instead, it has to follow a strict pipeline. You collect it, rigorously check its quality, make sure it's actually comparable across different countries, and then, the most important step, convert it into policy-relevant analysis so countries can make smart investments.
And when it comes to inclusion, it's fascinating how the toolkit frames this. We're talking about true gender mainstreaming here. That means you have to examine how policies impact men and women differently right from the very beginning of the design phase. It's all about spotting the barriers to participation early on so you can guarantee equitable access to the consultations, the implementation work, and ultimately the benefits of the project.
Which brings us to our final pillar, number 5, measuring institutional resilience. So how do you know if you're actually winning or just keeping busy? The source document has these incredibly dense lists of indicators, but distilling it down gives us a really clean comparative matrix. A coordinator has to be a bit of a detective, constantly balancing these scales. Are we successfully mobilizing finance, or are we just staring at a pile of unfunded promises? Do we have hard evidence of policy uptake, or are we sensing that the member countries aren't really taking ownership? Are our partners following through, or are we suffering from high staff dependency where the whole operation collapses if one person goes on vacation? Spotting those warning signs early is exactly what great leadership looks like. Because at the end of the day, it all boils down to this one idea. The long-term measure of success is an institutionally strong convention system in which parties trust the Secretariat. That's the whole ballgame. Without trust, decisions don't happen, the funding dries up, and regional cooperation just fractures. Building and protecting that trust is the true mandate of the P5 coordinator.
So I want to leave you with a question to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. Whether you find yourself leading a UN secretariat or just managing a really complex project of your own, you've got to ask yourself, are we simply driving activity volume, just staying busy, or are we truly building resilient, long-lasting cooperation? The answer to that changes absolutely everything. Thanks so much for joining me for this deep dive, and keep learning.